All right, so today we're going deep on a story that's a lot bigger than just religion.
Yeah.
It's about the Dalai Lama's succession.
Right.
A story with crazy high stakes, like ancient traditions bumping up against global politics.
It's fascinating how this religious event, has become such a focal point in international relations.
Yeah, it really is impacting way beyond just the Tibetan Buddhist community.
Oh, absolutely.
To really understand why we've got to start with the Dalai Lama himself. What makes him so significant,
Right.
especially to the Tibetan people.
Well, for Tibetans, the Dalai Lama is more than just a religious figurehead, right?
Right.
He really embodies their cultural identity and their fight for autonomy. Plus, he's a Nobel Peace Prize winner.
Right.
So that really adds to his global influence.
But like you said, this influence has also made him a point of contention with the Chinese government.
Of course.
They view him with suspicion.
Exactly. Ever since the Dalai Lama fled Tibet in 1959, after the uprising against Chinese rule,
Right.
he's been living in exile in India,
Right.
and China considers him a separatist threat.
A threat.
Yeah. So this upcoming succession, it's a major concern for them.
And the Dalai Lama's recent move to ensure his successor is born outside of China, like he details in his book Voice for the Voiceless.
Right.
That really kind of throws fuel on the fire, doesn't it?
Absolutely. It's a direct challenge to China's long-held assertion that they have the sole authority to choose the next Dalai Lama.
Wow.
They see it as a direct challenge to their sovereignty over Tibet.
So how is the next Dalai Lama usually chosen?
Okay, so traditionally, Tibetan Buddhists believe that the Dalai Lama is a reincarnated being.
Okay.
So when the Dalai Lama passes away, senior monks, they embark on this really intricate search for his reincarnation, thinking of vision signs and rigorous tests for these potential candidates,
Wow.
often young children.
It's interesting, this tension between the traditional selection process and China's current attempts to control it.
Yeah.
What's behind China's insistence on having the final say?
Well, historically, this process was largely free from political interference. Although China does point to precedents where Chinese emperors recognized past Dalai Lamas.
Okay.
But critics argue that, this was more symbolic
Okay.
than an assertion of control like we see today.
So why is China so insistent on controlling the Dalai Lama lineage now?
Right.
It seems like more than just maintaining historical precedent.
It is, you're right.
Yeah.
It's much deeper than that. To understand China's motives, we need to look at the bigger picture.
Okay.
The Dalai Lama isn't just a religious figure.
Right.
He's a powerful symbol of Tibetan identity and resistance to Chinese rule.
I see.
So by controlling the selection of the next Dalai Lama, China aims to install someone loyal to Beijing, effectively neutralizing any potential challenge to their authority in Tibet.
So it's like they're trying to mold Tibetan Buddhism to fit their political agenda.
Precisely. And that's where the story of the 11th Panchen Lama
Right.
really sheds light on the potential consequences
Yeah.
of this power struggle.
You're talking about the young boy recognized by the current Dalai Lama back in 1995.
Yes. The Dalai Lama identified a 6-year-old boy named Gedhun Choki Nyima
Right.
as the reincarnation of the Panchen Lama, the
Yeah.
second most important figure in Tibetan Buddhism.
Right.
But shortly after this announcement, Chinese authorities took the boy and his family into custody.
Oh, wow.
They vanished and haven't been seen since.
That's horrifying.
It is.
So what happened next?
Well, China installed their own Panchen Lama,
Really?
a boy named Gyaltsen Norbu, who most Tibetans view as illegitimate.
So now there are essentially two Panchen Lamas
Right.
creating confusion and potentially dividing the followers.
Exactly.
Could the same thing happen with the Dalai Lama's succession?
That's the million-dollar question.
Yeah.
And a very real concern.
Yeah.
The possibility of 2 Dalai Lamas, one chosen by Tibetans and one by China,
Right. Right.
could fracture the Tibetan Buddhist community worldwide.
Wow.
It really highlights the potential for religion to be used as a tool for political control.
And this brings us to the involvement of other powerful players like India and the U.S.
Yeah.
How have they responded to this situation?
Well, India, as you know, has provided refuge to the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile since 1959.
Right.
And this has created friction with China,
Okay.
who see any Indian involvement in the succession as an intrusion on their affairs.
And the U.S. hasn't stayed silent either.
No, they haven't. They've openly challenged China's claim to control the selection process.
So they have.
The U.S. passed a law stating that only Tibetan Buddhists have the right to choose the next Dalai Lama,
Wow.
even threatening sanctions against China if they interfere.
So it's not just about religion then.
No, it's not.
It's about control, influence, and the balance of power on the world stage.
It's exactly the situation. It's become incredibly complex with a web of competing interests and potential consequences that extend far beyond Tibet itself.
Wow. It's like we're watching a high-stakes game unfold, and the moves each player makes,
Right.
will have ripple effects across the globe.
They will.
But before we go any further, I want to connect this back to you, the listener.
Sure.
Imagine yourself in the shoes of a Tibetan Buddhist. How would you feel knowing that the future of your spiritual leader, or,
Right.
a figure central to your faith and culture,
Yeah.
is being decided by a government that many view as an oppressive force?
Right.
Does this story make you think differently about religious freedom and the power of faith in the face of political pressure?
It's a powerful question to consider. The Dalai Lama in his book expresses deep concern for Tibet's future under Chinese rule.
Yeah,
Yet he remains hopeful.
he does.
He writes, "The right of the Tibetan people to be the custodians of their own homeland cannot be indefinitely denied."
It's a testament to his resilience and the enduring spirit of the Tibetan people.
It is.
But given his age, the question of succession becomes even more pressing.
Yeah.
What happens if he passes away before a successor is found?
Right.
Especially one recognized by both Tibetans and the international community.
That's the question.
We'll explore those possibilities and the potential ramifications in the next part of our deep dive. It's a complex and delicate situation, no doubt. We've
Yeah.
been focusing on the political aspects, but let's shift gears a bit and talk about the cultural and religious implications.
All right.
What's at stake for Tibetan Buddhism and its followers if China succeeds in controlling the Dalai Lama lineage?
Well, this goes far beyond just appointing a figurehead, right?
Right.
Tibetan Buddhism, with its unique traditions and practices,
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
represents the very soul of Tibetan culture.
Right.
So if China manages to install a Dalai Lama who is subservient to their agenda,
Right.
it could lead to a dilution or even a distortion of these traditions, ultimately threatening the integrity of the faith as practiced by Tibetans.
You've touched on the potential for a manipulated version of Tibetan Buddhism,
Right.
one that aligns with China's political goals.
Exactly.
Can you give us a concrete example of what this might look like in practice?
Sure. Imagine a scenario where monasteries, which are central to Tibetan Buddhist life, are forced to incorporate Chinese nationalist ideology into their teachings,
Wow.
or where monks are required to undergo patriotic education programs that reinterpret religious doctrines to support the Communist Party's narrative.
It's a chilling thought, the potential for faith to be co-opted and used as a tool for political control.
Right.
This isn't just a theoretical concern, is it?
No, unfortunately not. We've already seen glimpses of this happening in Tibet.
So
China has been actively promoting its own version of Tibetan Buddhism within Tibet,
okay.
appointing monks loyal to the Communist Party to key positions within religious institutions. They're also investing heavily in building new temples and monasteries that adhere to their interpretation of Tibetan Buddhism.
Oh, wow.
It's a classic example of soft power,
Yeah.
subtly influencing culture and religion to achieve political goals.
So it's a multi-pronged approach.
Yeah.
They're not just trying to control the succession.
Yeah.
They're actively working to reshape Tibetan Buddhism from within.
Exactly. They're aiming to create a narrative where Tibetan Buddhism is inextricably linked to Chinese authority,
Wow.
thereby undermining the Dalai Lama's legitimacy and influence.
It's almost like they're trying to erase the very notion of Tibetan Buddhism as separate from Chinese control.
In a way, yes.
Yeah.
They aim to integrate Tibetan Buddhism into the fabric of Chinese society,
Right.
stripping it of its unique identity and making it subservient to the state.
The Dalai Lama has expressed concern about this cultural and religious erosion.
Yes, he has.
He sees the succession as a way to ensure the continuity of Tibetan Buddhism in its authentic form.
Right. His declaration that his successor will be born in the free world is a direct challenge to this agenda.
Yeah.
It's a way to safeguard the lineage and the future of Tibetan Buddhism outside of China's sphere of influence.
But his declaration also raises some practical questions.
Sure.
How exactly does he envision this happening?
Right.
The traditional method of finding a reincarnated Dalai Lama involves a complex process within Tibet.
Right.
How would this work in a completely different cultural setting?
That's a question that has many people speculating.
Yeah.
The Dalai Lama hasn't given us a concrete roadmap, but he has hinted at some possibilities.
Okay.
He has suggested that he might choose his successor while he's still alive,
Really?
breaking with centuries of tradition.
Wow.
He's also mentioned the possibility of a female Dalai Lama, which would be a radical departure.
So he's clearly thinking outside the box,
Right.
looking for innovative ways to protect his lineage and Tibetan Buddhism.
Absolutely. He recognizes the urgency of the situation given his age and the rapidly changing landscape in Tibet.
It's a race against time, isn't it?
It is.
And all of this is happening under the watchful eye of China,
Right.
who has already issued warnings against any perceived interference in what they consider their internal affairs.
Any move that challenges their narrative or control will likely be met with strong resistance from Beijing.
This brings us back to the crucial question,
Yeah.
what happens if the Dalai Lama passes away before a clear successor is found,
Right.
particularly one recognized by both Tibetans and the international community?
That scenario is a major concern for Tibetans.
Yeah.
And a potential flashpoint on the global stage.
Right.
It could lead to a chaotic situation with multiple claimants to the title,
Yeah.
further dividing the Tibetan Buddhist community.
And China would undoubtedly seize the opportunity to install their own chosen successor, wouldn't they?
Most likely, and this would create a deep rift within Tibetan Buddhism, potentially leading to two competing lineages, each claiming legitimacy.
Right.
It would also exacerbate tensions between China and countries like India and the U.S.,
Yeah.
who have supported the Dalai Lama's right to self-determination.
It seems like the Dalai Lama is making some bold moves,
Yeah.
trying to outmaneuver China in this complex geopolitical chess match.
Right.
But the clock is ticking and the stakes couldn't be higher.
His actions highlight the intertwined nature of religion and politics on a global scale.
It's a story that captures the struggle for cultural preservation, religious freedom, and the right to self-determination.
Yeah.
We've seen how the Dalai Lama is trying to navigate these challenges, but
Right.
but how are other players involved?
Yeah.
What role do India and the U.S. play in this unfolding drama?
Exactly.
We'll explore those questions and more in the final part of our deep dive. So we've been talking about all the complexities around the Dalai Lama's succession and how it's become, such a focal point in global politics.
Yeah.
Let's zoom in on India and the U.S.,
Okay.
two countries that are really deeply involved in this situation.
Right.
India has been a safe haven for the Dalai Lama and the Tibetan government in exile for decades.
Right.
How is this impacting their relationship with China?
Well, India's support for the Tibetan cause has always been a point of contention with China.
Yeah.
They view it as meddling in their internal affairs.
Yeah.
The Dalai Lama's presence in India and the Tibetan government in exile operating from there,
Right.
it just adds fuel to this fire. Any perceived involvement by India in the succession process
Right.
could further escalate tensions between the two countries.
And it's not just India, right?
Yeah.
The U.S. has also taken a strong stance,
Right.
advocating for the Tibetan people's right to choose their own spiritual leader.
Yes. The U.S. has been very vocal in its support for Tibetan religious freedom.
Right.
Their law stating that only Tibetan Buddhists have the right to choose the next Dalai Lama, along with the threat of sanctions against China if they interfere.
Yeah.
It puts them on a collision course with Beijing.
So you have these two major players, India and the U.S.,
Right.
whose interests kind of align with the Dalai Lama's vision,
Right.
for a successor chosen freely by Tibetans.
Right.
How is China responding to this pressure from the international community?
Well, China sees any outside involvement as a direct challenge to their sovereignty.
Okay.
They've repeatedly warned against what they perceive as interference in their internal affairs.
Mm-hmm.
They view the U.S. law in particular as a hostile act.
Wow.
This situation really highlights how a seemingly religious issue, has become intertwined with these complex geopolitical dynamics,
Right.
raising the stakes even higher.
It's a delicate balancing act for India and the U.S.
It is.
They want to support the Tibetan cause,
Right.
but they also need to manage their relationships with China,
That's-
or global superpower.
Exactly. Both countries have strategic interests in the region,
Right.
including economic ties and security concerns.
Right.
So they need to weigh the potential consequences of their actions carefully.
Yeah.
Too much pressure on China could backfire,
Yeah.
leading to increased repression in Tibet or even military action.
This is a high-stakes game with no easy answers.
That's for sure.
It's fascinating to see how the Dalai Lama, at 89 years old, is making such bold moves
I know.
to try and secure the future of his lineage and the Tibetan people.
His declaration that his successor will be born outside of China is a powerful statement.
It is.
It's a way of challenging China's authority and asserting the right of Tibetans to determine their own spiritual destiny.
But it's a risky move, isn't it?
It is. It could provoke a strong reaction from China.
Yeah.
And make the situation even more volatile.
The Dalai Lama is essentially drawing a line in the sand.
He is.
It remains to be seen how China will respond and how this will all play out on the international stage. As we wrap up our deep dive today, I'm left with a sense of awe at the Dalai Lama's resilience and strategic thinking.
Yeah.
He's not just a spiritual leader.
No.
He's a master chess player navigating this complex geopolitical landscape.
His actions highlight the enduring power of faith and the importance of cultural preservation in the face of adversity.
The story of the Dalai Lama's succession is far from over.
It's not.
It's a story filled with uncertainty and potential for dramatic shifts in the global balance of power.
Absolutely.
As we continue to watch the story unfold, it begs the question.
Yeah.
What if the Dalai Lama decides to dissolve the institution of the Dalai Lama altogether?
Wow.
Could this be the ultimate act of defiance? A way to prevent China from controlling the lineage and to empower Tibetans to chart their own spiritual and political course?
It's a radical thought.
It is.
But one that underscores the unpredictable nature of this situation.
Our deep dive today has shed light on the intricate web of religion, politics, and cultural identity that surrounds the Dalai Lama's succession.
Yeah.
It's a story that will continue to captivate the world as it unfolds.